Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome again. It's great to see so many of our good friends in this audience today. I want to thank you for taking the time. I want to acknowledge that we were intentional in programming this in the morning and not at 6 p.m. as usual, because if it were 6 p.m. tonight, many of you might be watching World Cup soccer with a particular interest in a particular team. So thank you for coming. Filling a room like this is a representation to me of the civic spirit that abides in this community that's so palpable and so beautiful. I know it's tough sledding out there for those of you who are working at nonprofits. I suspect that we're going to tell you some things that you already know when we show you the findings of this study that we've just commissioned. But I just want to recognize your commitment to the well-being of our residents, whether you're a nonprofit person or a donor. It means a lot that you're here. Briefly, I would ask that people who work at the foundation who serve as volunteers on our board or a committee raise their hands. I'm not going to call you out, but thank you for all your work on our behalf. If you work for or are on the board of a nonprofit organization, would you please raise your hands? Okay, we got the tribe here today. That's beautiful. I would like to ask anybody from local government that might be here in official capacity to raise their hands. I see Elba, I see Maida. Thank you all for being here. So as most of you already know, Napa Valley Community Foundation works side by side with local donors and nonprofits to tackle the most important challenges our valley faces. We believe that a prosperous community rises from a strong foundation, so every day we gather generous hearts and bright minds, like all of y'all in the room right now, to solve the problems that lie just beneath the surface of this beautiful place we all call home. Because when we harness the power of our collective generosity, we become a force for good, making life better for everybody in this community. In partnership with many of you in this room, I'm proud to tell you that in our history, we've distributed nearly $120 million in the form of grants and scholarships. And money alone is not the full job spec of the Community Foundation. From time to time, we commission research to better understand issues, challenges, opportunities in our community. And thus it was that we decided, after a period of dormancy that would make a brood of cicadas envious, 20 years, to do something that we did first in 2003, which is to hoover up all of the data on all of the public charities that are incorporated in Napa County and to try to make meaning of what we discovered in terms of shifts, where the money comes from, who's new, who might have exited. And our goal is like to have a bird's eye view of what's going on. Frankly, on the funding side of things, we have the luxury of distance. We have the luxury of perspective, because nobody on my team is a case manager, a clinician, a social worker, a home visitor, etc. You are doing the work that is proximate to the needs, and we can stand back and try to see where there might be populations of people who are slipping through the cracks of the otherwise beautifully robust tapestry of services that you all work so hard to provide. And that's really sort of what got us into this business of like, let's take a look at the data, shall we? I suspect we'll be telling you things that you know, which I said moments ago, and it need not be repeated. So what's our secret agenda, if there is one? It's really to call out that we need to meet the moment together. You're going to discover in our slides that government funding is an essential part historically of what makes this sector so strong. And we all know that government funding is being clawed back and shrunk. And so the call to action here, spoiler alert, is really for those of us who work in philanthropy in an organized way, or those of us who are individual givers or corporate givers, to step up as best we can to help fill some of the gaps that all of you are experiencing. At this time, I think it's my great pleasure to begin the PowerPoint presentation. Now, there's no surer way to alienate a long-standing group of friends than to drag them at 9:30 in the morning through 30 pages of PowerPoint, but I'm going to try to keep this brisk. It'll take us a minute to get through. My colleague Julia is going to help me work our way through these slides. And the plan is thus. We'll go through the slides, and then we're going to reserve at least half an hour for conversation and questions, because you're going to have them. Full disclosure, we're going to let you, with the magic of a QR code. This we couldn't do. Yes, next slide. This we could not do 20 years ago. You can point your phone at that and you can download today's presentation, which is oh so slightly different than the actual data series itself, which we're still fine-tuning because it needs some crisping up at the edges, but it's kind of 90% the same, and this is a way that you can follow along and have what it is that we're sharing today. All right. Oh wait, do I need to stay there for a minute? Dear Moore, which way am I going? Oh, no. Why am I going the wrong way? There we are. I don't get out much. I just don't get out much. Okay? So are we good? Everybody got the thing? Okay, this is like going to dinner with my mom during the pandemic. Like, Mom, do you have it? Okay. All right. Now I know how to go backwards as well as going forwards. All right, so some disclosure statements about scope and methodology. What we're going to share is directionally correct but imperfect in the following way. We looked at 501c3 public benefit corporations that are incorporated in Napa County, which misses some stuff. So there are a number of organizations that are incorporated outside of Napa County that nonetheless provide important services here. Progress Foundation comes to mind, 10,000 Degrees comes to mind, Summer Search comes to mind, etc. Similarly, there are organizations which are based here that serve multiple counties, like the Clinic or like Aldea. And therefore, the numbers aren't perfect, but they're sort of directionally informative about how big the sector is. But I want to just share that it's not everything, because we said draw a line around Napa County and show us what you got. The data comes from an independent researcher who used to work at the Urban Institute, who knows how to deal with all the 990 stuff. And what we're comparing to is historical data that came from the University of San Francisco Institute for Nonprofit Management. An important thing to underscore in the footnote is this, and I talked to Karen Fisher, who's here from the Queen of the Valley Medical Center this morning about it. Because currently, and for the last several years, the Queen, in her association with Providence, did not file an independent standalone 990 tax return, she is omitted from this data set. And that's a big omission because last time we looked, circa 2017, it was a $380 million a year in revenue enterprise, right? So it's just not here because we couldn't get a standalone 990. Talked about this. We're eager to see what's changed. So here's the punchline. Comparing the 20-year-ago period to today, what we have is a nonprofit sector that is sizable, dynamic, and also under strain. 20 years ago, there were 480 public charities incorporated in Napa County. Today, there are about 200 more. Interestingly enough, that's a combination of new entrants, things that have been born in the last 20 years, of which there are 376, and things that used to be that are no longer, where we have nearly 200 organizations that existed 20 years ago that don't anymore. So, you know, as with my favorite dry cleaner that closed over there by Nob Hill and I have to go to Chardonnay now, that's just a thing. Like, things come and go. Life is not, you know, static. But I'm telling you things you already know. Sector revenues in that period, and these are inflation adjusted, by the way, grew about 20%, from $1 billion 20 years ago to $1.2 billion today. Importantly, the house view at the foundation is that we don't have too many nonprofits in this community. We don't have more than other Bay Area counties. Now, is California maybe a little richer per capita in terms of nonprofits than, say, the great state of Nevada or Arizona? Yeah, probably. But what we do see is that there are many more small and very small nonprofits, which we'll define shortly, than we have in other places, which I think leads to the experience of some in the community to feel as if, like, geez Louise, I've got 9 crab feed invitations this January. What's going on? Okay? If you remember nothing else about today's presentation, remember this slide. Of that 1.2 billion, 45% is government grants and contracts. Now, there's a lot that we don't know. I can't tell you, well, how much of that is federal, how much is state, how much is local jurisdictions, but historically, a lot is federal, and it passes through the state, and then it passes through the county. So this makes us nervous. This, in effect, is the call to action, and we're going to talk more about it in a minute. So let's talk about your favorite topic, HR 1. You know, it's a kind of triple whammy because it will increase the demand for the services that you provide. For example, when millions of people are disenrolled from Medi-Cal, while simultaneously taking away dollars that you used to rely on to provide those services. And that's the demand side of things. On the supply side of things, I'm worried about the fact that the number of individual households in this country who are philanthropic, who itemize their taxes, has declined starkly over the last 8 or 10 years, ever since 2017, from, you know, like 40-odd% to now I think the high 20s. And now there is this threshold over which one must pass to have deductibility at all if you're an itemizer. In other words, the first 0.5% of whatever you give away doesn't count. You have to breach that number. So although again, like, we don't know, it may or may not change, but it's reasonable to assume that this could disincentivize individual giving precisely at a time when it is needed most. All right, so I'm going to talk about what we would call the supply side of the philanthropic equation in this community, meaning entities that give away money, including the Community Foundation. And then I'm going to pass the mic to Julia to talk about the world that most of you inhabit, which is providing services and relying on grants and individual contributions to do your thing and pursue your mission. So what do we see? Writ large, there are 750 charitable organizations in the Valley, of which 71 are foundations or funders, and the balance, 678, are charities that provide services of some kind. So here's some examples of the foundations. Names you know well: the Gasser Foundation, ourselves, and the Napa Valley Vintners Healthcare Fund. So that's this, you know, that's the dotted line, right? That's the, and it's not perfect because we too raise money in order to be useful and give it away. So it's not perfect, but just bear with me. On the demand side, what we see are these other 680 charities, including many of you here, that operate at vastly different scales. So there are 5 very large organizations. What's very large? Annual revenues of more than 20 million. Who decided? We did. It seemed like a reasonable line to draw. More typically they're, you know, 100 million plus. So take the clinic, take the hospital. Again, the queen is missing. Interestingly, if you're a Napa resident, as I am, you might say, the Meadows, huh? Well, they've been tax exempt forever, but they switched their status from a C something else to a C3 like 3 years ago. So they weren't in this data set 20 years ago, but they are today, and the revenues are sizable. I think it's $250, $300 million a year. So that's a retirement, you know, assisted living facility in Napa. Then we have 120 what we call mid-sized nonprofits whose budgets are south of 20 million but north of 250,000 that typically provide a broad range of services, receive funding from multiple sources, and often rely, probably most often rely on paid staff to get the work done rather than volunteers alone. This is sort of the tribe of the Community Foundation because frankly, given our scale, this is where the grants at the size that we make them can typically put a dent in something that you need. It doesn't mean we don't give to the very large and the small that will follow, but that's kind of our focus. And you see some examples there. Who can guess what the next ones are called if we've gone from very large to mid-size? Why? I'm here to tell you it's small. So small doesn't mean bad. Small doesn't mean ineffective. Small doesn't mean they're not doing something really important, because look at some of the all-stars in my blue bubble there. But generally, they have revenues between $50,000 and $250,000. some of which provide services on an ongoing year-round basis. So take Can Do as an example that's always hustling to do great things in the community year-round. Some of which, like once a year, it is the crab feed, and then we're going to buy trombones from the Vintage High School Boosters Club. All right, that's success. Then, brace yourselves, everybody. We have 428 very small organizations that have revenues below $50,000 a year, most of which are volunteer-led single-purpose entities or houses of worship. So we got 90 houses of worship in the mix, 52 arts and music and humanities organizations, a bunch of sports and recreation leagues, and so on and so on. And it's, again, it's not bad, it just is. Frankly, one thing I love about the philanthropic sector is that unless you are a hospital or a university, there are effectively no barriers to entry. It's like, by God, we need a something in our town. Let's get some people together to do it. I don't have a problem with it. We don't have a problem with that. And look, the lights have come down. This is much more intimate all of a sudden. All right, so a few words about the funding side of things before I pass it over to talk about, to Julia to talk about the other side of things. So in 20 years, it's interesting because there aren't that many more foundations today than there were 20 years ago. There's just a wee bit more from 68 to 71, but the asset base has grown quite substantially. Largely, that's driven by the fact that our good friends at the Cliff Bar Family Foundation chose to incorporate their private family foundation here in this community. Importantly, it should be noted that although it is sizable, it makes grants all over the place. So not just Napa, but the US, California, et cetera. But it's a beautiful thing that they're here, and you get a feeling for the sea change in asset base because of the growth there, and also the growth of the community foundation. We didn't look at all of history. We looked at sort of post-pandemic to now to sort of paint a picture about what we call the three anchor funding institutions in this community. It doesn't mean that there aren't other generous family foundations. Importantly, there are hundreds of donor-advised funds that are connected to local families that are operated by Schwab in San Francisco or by a family office in Chicago. We just can't see them. Similarly, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of family foundations that are incorporated in Atherton, Portola Valley, Menlo Park. Occasionally, we get lucky and we get into a relationship with those families, but they're not philanthropically domiciled here. So this is not perfect again, but here are sort of the three doors that you're accustomed to knocking on. Vintners, ourselves, and Gaster Foundation over the last 5 years, and it's 84 million, which is, nothing to sneeze at. And when you look at that year over year, there's some interesting trends to observe. With respect to the foundation, we're the red line. We tend to get spiky when there's a disaster. So we have become, not because we asked for it, but we've become the place where people contribute dollars after a wildfire, after an earthquake, and we're proud to do that work. And those are some spikes, so you're probably seeing some pandemic and some 2020 wildfires in there. It's not the only reason that we're up and down, but it is one of the reasons. Similarly with Gasser, occasionally on top of their baseline of say $1.5 million to $2 million a year in distributions in the form of crash grants, there'll be the odd property that they give to On the Move or they give to Mentis, way to go, we like that. It's important to note here that foundations are lovely. I've worked at one for 20 odd years, but we are a small wedge of the pie of local generosity. So that number in the middle, 157 million, is what was given to nonprofits by individuals, foundations, and corporations in 2022. There's a hash mark because some of the nonprofits have fiscal years that end on June 30 of 22, and others, you follow my drift, but that's as close as we could get. And so the 11 at the top, which is the three anchor funders, is sizable in that year. It's part of that story of 84 million over 5 years, but other kinds of giving are a much bigger number. They're part of that 157, and here again, is government grants and contracts at 452 million. A few considerations to think about as we move forward together. When in doubt, state the obvious with authority. Like, there's not enough money in all of philanthropy locally to fill the gaps that may be coming your way as it relates to government funding. But we all have an important role to play. We all need to think about diversifying our funding sources and possibly even trimming FTEs and trimming programs. I wish it were otherwise, but it's probably time to start having those conversations. There is this beautiful opportunity that's hidden in plain sight here too, which is the families that have their philanthropy domiciled outside of Napa County, but nonetheless are connected to this place and love this place. That's not an easy thing to sort of puzzle through. Having said that, some of the most fruitful relationships that the Community Foundation has enjoyed in recent years are precisely with those who have been successful elsewhere, who have liquid capacity that's not tied up in viticulture. I'm cheering for viticulture, believe me, I am. Who are sophisticated and wise in the ways of giving because they've spent their careers in urban centers and now they're here or here in some way. And so finding ways for all of us to connect to them is a lovely thing to consider. The thing at the bottom is what we already know, which is that it's not going to be any picnic for the sector or for our primary engines in this economy, viticulture and hospitality, at least in the near to midterm. So just a consideration. And again, something I'm telling you that you probably have experienced already. Okay, it's time for me to pass the mic. Or a mic.
2 mics.
2 mics.
Thank you.
Here.
Oh, thank you. The little mic is for the people watching at home.
Good morning.
Good morning. So this latter part of the presentation is shorter, I promise, and also kind of drills down with some pretty colorful slides into things that Terence has already mentioned. Oopsies, I went the wrong way too. Big button. So as Terence mentioned, we have far more small and very small nonprofits here in Napa County than we do mid-size and very large. You can see that 4 out of 5 of our nonprofits, or 82% of nonprofits, are small or very small. Now, when we look at the revenue, it dramatically changes for the inverse. So 75% of the sector's revenues are taken up by those large, very large, which of course I don't need to tell you means that most of you are doing a lot with very little. Interestingly, in the last 20 years, our nonprofits have grown both by headcount and revenues, however, the revenues have lagged behind the headcount. So once again, you're all doing a lot with very little. Nearly half of the nonprofits we have today were incorporated in the last 15 years, which is interesting because that came at a time where the county's population started to decline. And as Terence mentioned, we don't have more nonprofits per capita than our neighboring Bay Area counties. We do have more small and very small. So as you can see, 82% of our nonprofits are small and very small, compared to 60% across the state. So this is something that I probably don't even need to tell you, you're all well familiar with this. But on average, these mid-sized nonprofits, most of you in the room, your pie charts look like this. So 40%, that red, are individual donations, 26% green, program services revenue, 25% government grants and contracts, and all the rest, including investment returns and membership and events, makes up a very small percentage. When we double click on that 25 and 26%, 51%, those are all reliant on government for the most part, and vulnerable in different ways. Again, it's probably not something I need to tell all of you, But the government grants and contracts are something we've already seen be cut by the federal government or by the state budget, or related to HR 1. And those often are, the government grants and contracts often require nonprofits to provide the services before they draw down the money. Again, something you all know, and can cause cash flow issues. Your 26% program service revenue, that's like Medi-Cal reimbursements, and those are vulnerable not just because of the number of people who may lose Medi-Cal, but because the rates can be changed at any time by the federal government, by the state government. And those also generally rely on an outlay of cash from the nonprofits before they can draw those down. So when you're operating on small margins and cash flow becomes a challenge, we have kind of a double whammy. Interestingly, Napa nonprofits employ nearly 5,000 people, which is about 7% of all private sector jobs. And so that's part of our economic engine. I also was struck by about 4,800 people, many of whom probably, if you look at the number of people that commute into Napa County to work, doesn't seem like a whole lot to run an engine that is helping thousands and thousands and thousands of people every day. So if you're a musical theater fan like I am, you look at this and you say, we've got trouble right here in River City, and revenue growth, once again, lagging behind headcount. A lot of headcount, there was headcount growth during COVID. There was also funding to help support that. The headcount growth is still needed, and the funding is no longer here. As Terence said, if you remember one thing, remember this: nearly half of sector revenues come from some government source, which is something that we are all concerned about. And HR 1 and other government funding cuts are going to keep pushing the demand for nonprofit services at a time when the funding for nonprofit services is not going to increase. So on that positive note, what are we all here for? So at the foundation, what are we doing about it? That's the question. And one of the things that we're doing about it is what we're doing right here today. We want to share this data and research broadly. Like Terence said, we want to get to donors who might not be domiciled in Napa County, but might care about the work that you all do. We want to say this is the moment that we need to meet. We want to increase giving, work with our donors, make multi-year grants, make unrestricted grants where we can. And last year, we launched the Elaine Jones Safety Net Grants Program, which provided both a lifeline in terms of general support grants and a compass in terms of capacity building so nonprofits can cut expenses, raise revenue, and find their way through these challenging times. And we granted $1.65 million last year, thanks to many of you. And we will be launching year 2 in the fall. And alongside that, we are increasing our investments in advocacy, capacity building, deepening local government partnerships, because the only way through this is for us to all work together. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Terence, and we're going to leave some time for you all to ask questions. Here, you take this, I'll look for it.
All right, let's do this Phil Donahue style. I don't need to be up there. And do we have more than, yes, we have more than one microphone, because we're not cheap, we're just good stewards, okay? Must be a thing or two on your minds. Who would like to get the ball rolling with a reflection, a question? Rob, in the back, let's get you too.
First off, thanks for giving us this profile. Helpful to see. Couple thoughts. First, I assume in that mid-size, you don't have data to break down number of agencies that are under $1 million or between 1 and 3 million or 1 and... That would have been good, I think. I would have liked to have seen that if you had it.
We do have it.
That would be
it's
good.
Just not there.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be great to see, because you're right, that mid-size is most of the people in the room. The other thing I wanted to just comment on, you look at the growth in revenue for nonprofits, especially organizations in this room, so much of it was tied to disaster revenue. And I'm not saying I don't want another disaster. I really don't. It's been nice that we've sort of been disaster-free for a period of years. But I think that's really an important point here. We were, in a sense, reliant and grew because of all those disasters coming in from the federal level, the state, locally, and since there's been no disasters and so the reverse has happened, that has dried up, and that's another challenge in terms of revenue coming into organizations.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I mean, I would tack on that another thing that was a temporary boost was all the extra dough in the system during the pandemic. So we got ARPA, we got the CARES Act, and a lot of that flowed down and enabled nonprofits to expand at a time when we desperately needed you to expand to serve the people who were suffering, and yet it goes away. And so there we have it. Let's see, is anyone on that side? Oh, Jerry.
Jerry, I'm coming.
Good morning, Jerry Hansen, Napa Chamber of Commerce, and I was really intrigued by the numbers of new nonprofits over the time period. And I think I heard from your answer that you do have this data, but I think I would be interested in, not to diminish the work of a faculty parent association or the marching band. Is there a way that we can kind of set those aside so that we're actually looking at nonprofits who are reliant on government contracts and doing kind of that social service safety net, like I think most people in this room are, so that we're, we definitely think that the Faculty Association and the Vintage Marching Band is really important, but how do we make sure that we are focusing our responses and our attention on the, I guess, most affected? Because I think the numbers are telling about the number of nonprofits, but I don't know how many of those are actually created to directly serve the need of a client or the community in a way that is not very specific to one sliver. And so I know you probably have that data, and I'm really pleased with the responses to this on that last slide. Is sort of, now what? How do we do this? How do we increase giving without a disaster? So I think at some point I'd be interested in that too, because the chamber has a 501c3, but we don't go after the same money. We're not competing with news or Coke, for example.
That's a really good point, and we do have that data, and we could isolate that.
I mean, to some degree, the category called mid-size, it's somewhat blunt to do it only based on revenues, but it's not a bad proxy. And so I would say it's sort of 85 or 90% of those entities that you're trying to get your eyes on are probably in that mid-size category. And to Rob's point, we will happily publish the whole enchilada. Like we have it's a giant Excel spreadsheet. And I thought, well, maybe you'd endure PowerPoint, but surely not a spreadsheet. So when we get the final version of this on our website, we will also, just as we did 20 years ago, like, here's the searchable list if you'd like to go all the way through it. So we're happy to do that. Okay, what else? Let's see. Ken and then Norma. Oh, dear God. Look out.
Thank you again, Terence, and the foundation for doing this. Question I have is there enough granularity to the data? Is it available that someone could drill down and see what type of federal grants or government programs have been impinged by cutbacks so that we could sort of see where the source of the funds are coming, whether we're going to be directly impacted by those cuts because it may be in this bucket or that bucket? And then second question is there a way to determine how efficient we are at applying for those funds? In other words, there must be some criteria that one has to follow in order to actually make an application to obtain a grant. And maybe there's a way to also study the efficiency of that application process so that we can improve the probability of our success in getting whatever remaining funds are accessible.
Thank you. Great questions. I'm going to let Julia take a stab at question 2. The answer to question 1, sadly, is no. Because of the way that we all file our 990 information returns, it's just a giant bucket. It's either called program services revenue or individual contribution revenue or government grants and contracts. And we can't parse it in the context of the 990s by federal, state, local, et cetera. Now, we could do a survey and get some feeling for it, which we haven't done. What about number 2?
I don't have an easy answer to number 2, except that is certainly on everyone's mind. And I don't want to pick on Jennifer Yasumoto somewhere here, our head of Health and Human Services, but I know she's worked hard at tracking some of that information. And we don't have it in terms of like actual data, but it is certainly something we're paying attention to. And the latter part of your question about efficiency is very much what we're focusing our capacity building grants on, because there are most certainly some efficiencies that could be gained that would help more organizations draw down more government funding.
Norma?
Thank you. Thank you as well. There's a lot of pride in the fact that there's so many small nonprofits. That means that people really care about each other and we act. It doesn't need to be within an institution. So that's something to celebrate.
Indeed.
So that's great. The other two more things. When you said program fees by Medicare, Medical, for example, that's still government. So that separation of government and program fees, given that it's mostly government entities that support those fees, I'm not necessarily understand why it's not part of government. And the third one, I was going to ask, is there a way of having a study that explores the different impact on the different sectors of the nonprofits? Like, we are all connected, but I would imagine probably an arts organization doesn't rely so much on government funds than a social services organization. And what is the effect of that?
Yeah. Thank you, Norma. Great questions. Regarding the program services revenue bucket, again, it's a very blunt bucket on the Form 990. Surely most of it is government funding, government monies in the form of payment streams for Medi-Cal. But like if you're a presenting theater company, that's ticket sales at the box office. So it's hard to parse. We do think there's an opportunity to sort of go into some of the verticals, forgive me, like, health and social services, education, and I'm not committing us to do that presently, but we do have some data that could at least illuminate, well, how big is the health and human services sector within that 1.2 billion? Like, that would be easy to do. So,
Got one right here.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Laura Beltran with the Office of a Senate Member Albert Curry, and I think you're already following what you guys do. I know the government here, so don't shoot me. But I just want to really invite everybody that the Assembly Room is actually hosting a one-on-one webinar on grant writing. So I know you guys are small capacity, but we just want to make sure that we'll just give you some tools to capture those grants that are available, at least from the state side of it. So I will give the foundation information, and hopefully you guys could distribute that. And it's a webinar, so anybody could sign up on the comfort of your home. So I just wanted to give out the information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See there in the back.
Yep.
Hi, Kara Bruner with the Napa County Bicycle Coalition. I also want to thank you for this incredible presentation. And I'm wondering if in sort of the magic 8-ball of data that you have here, if you have any insights into nonprofits that are more prevention, like primary prevention focused as opposed to service focused. And I know there's a lot that do both, but the stopping it before it happens is a sort of more abstract and harder story to tell than intervening when someone's in pain. And I'm wondering if the future of funding is going to change for the prevention-oriented folks in a way that it might not for the service folks, if you have any insight into that.
It's a great question. It feels like the sort of thing we could let our friends at ChatGPT, truly, because basically everything is on the 990, including the mission statement and some examples of programmatic work. It would be hugely labor intensive to manually, and there's a lot that we know, especially about the 120, who's sort of our tribe. But as it relates to who's upstream and who's responsive, or frankly both, because it's often both, that might be knowable with the aid of the robots who will soon control us all. Michelle.
Thanks, Terence. Michelle Lehman with the Napa Valley Vintners. So thank you, Terence and Community Foundation, for this report. It also makes me think, and I know this might not be a really popular thought, but how are we going to start thinking about efficiencies going forward? Perhaps mergers, kind of nonprofits coming together, or efficiencies like resources. So how do we make large orders for our supplies all together, or healthcare, we get better rates if we do it all together, or even data impact. What can we do around kind of on a larger scale, maybe working together to find ways to help some of our mid-sized nonprofits have their data combined and collected and put together in a way that's good for the whole county and those organizations.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you for raising it. Our experience has been, and so here's the summer project for Julia, me, and the team. We're going to bring some of you together, not in groups of 130, but in smaller groups where we can all be a little more candid, and say, how could we be helpful? On a spectrum of sort of, this is hard, but not crazy hard, I could imagine, say, because we've heard this from many of you, like, man, we can't find a controller or a CFO or an accountant or a bookkeeper. What if, I'm riffing here and give me evil stares if I go too far. What if the foundation funded a sort of joint back office and gave it 3 years of runway, and like instead of needing the 13 and a half full-time equivalents that exist across these 80 groups, well, now there's 6, and maybe you pay a little something, but it's a lot less than you used to pay, just as an idea. On the other end of the spectrum, that's very, very hard, is talk about consolidation or merger, if you like. And it's been our experience that this only ever happens when it's the idea of the entities themselves. Because even on our best days when we're writing 6-figure checks because our donors are generous and enable us to do that, we are still minority investors in most of the things that we all care about. And it's like, T. Boone Pickens, I am not. We can't compel. It's all carrot and no stick. But when there's interest, and here I'm looking at you, dear Norma, you were around during the era when we had St. Helena Family Resource Center and Calistoga Family Resource Center. It was your idea to combine. We helped you do that. But universally, it's pretty much true that there needs to be organic interest among those who see the path. I don't know, Julie, if you have a different view or want to comment on that.
You covered it.
Okay. How about the gentleman?
one
Let's say,
here.
all right, so Dan, and then this gentleman, and then we'll come back to you.
Hi, good morning. Dan is the registrar. I just wanted to clarify the data that you have goes to 2023 because that's the most complete data you have available.
Yes, the truth is we could probably now get 2024, but this took us so long that when we started, that was the freshest we could get, sort of last summer.
Okay, and kind of a different sort of thing. If I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that the largest or the best path forward to bridge some of these gaps is to look at philanthropic resources who may be connected to Napa County but don't live here. If I'm understanding that correctly, or at least that's one of the bigger options. Do you have any advice or thoughts for the people here about how they might go about doing that? Because I guess it's a little bit of a black box. How do you figure that out, or what strategies do you have in mind, if any, about how to go about doing it?
Yeah, it's definitely sort of a yes and, right? Where it's like there are plenty of people here who are generous, who we all know, who we can rely on, and then the idea of how do we recruit people who are here on weekends or seasonally, for example. As I like to say, part of my ambition at the foundation is to spend more time with people who use the words summer and winter as verbs instead of nouns. You're welcome. So here's some of the things the foundation has done that's been helpful in that regard, and I offer them up to my esteemed colleagues, open source. One is you build a really strong board and a really strong asset development committee, and you find people here whose Rolodexes go further than mine. And you present to those people periodically a list of folk that you might have encountered or heard about. And then you do this arduous, painful, solemn, private business of like, okay, does anybody know the so-and-sos? Because come on, like we saw them step up in a big way for Stomp. Like, who knows the so-and-sos? There really is no other way to do it. Well, that's not true. There's one other way. So we have found that by hosting frequent events that are not fundraisers and inviting people that we are aware that have that profile to come into a room like this where it's a ask-free zone. There's no, like I hope you never feel compelled to give when you come to one of these because we don't make an ask generally. And just to sort of get them more proximate, more emotionally proximate to what you're doing. And if all you do is the gala once a year, that's tough. But if you do 3 or 4 things that are like, whoops, hello, sorry. That's sort of like, come and have breakfast with the ED, which I saw Jenny do really nicely recently. Or, like things like that might be a better strategy. I would encourage you to program on Thursdays, Fridays, and Mondays for the people who are here on weekends, and so forth. So, yes. Go ahead, Jen. Good morning.
Hi, Jennifer Gosselin, Health and Human Services, and I was going to attempt to respond to maybe a couple of questions, even though they were just sort of lobbed into the room. The question around have we tracked kind of the nature of federal funding cuts, which is a good question, and we had actually attempted to try to start tracking that, and it's really complicated, and not all the funding passes through the county. So the line of sight, I think, that any of us has on that is really complicated. And I will also say it's complicated by the fact that, I'll just say for Health and Human Services, we don't get direct federal dollars. They come from the federal to the state, and then they get kind of renamed. And so even backing into, we've done our own exercises of backing into and tracing the federal dollars back up. But I suspect for all the nonprofits in the room, they're seeing direct cuts that we're not seeing through sort of our line of sight. But we know there are cuts because we all meet regularly as nonprofit and health and human services providers. That's one thing I'll say. The other thing I will say around the comment around prevention. So prevention is shifting. It is shifting by virtue of one of our very complex funding streams. And it still remains to be seen what the funding that we used to get that would come directly to the county through Health and Human Services has been redirected to a different state agency entirely. And so we are still waiting to see what that will look like. Getting to the point around our nonprofit profile here has more small and extra small nonprofits is worrisome in that landscape. And I say that because the direction that the state is going with a lot of the funding makes it actually more complicated, and they are looking at more regional work. And so when you start thinking about potentially drops of money coming, and the way in which you're competitive is if you're regional, that has implications for the landscape that we have in our composition of nonprofits. So that's another piece that sort of the ecosystem is shifting rapidly right now. It's shifting obviously because of HR1, it's shifting because of the state budget, and it's also shifting because at the same time the state of California has been going through a transformation of its system. So we are iterating within iterations and iterations. So I guess the thing I would say is that even when federal and state funding is available, I would say on behalf of the nonprofits, it's getting more complex to draw down.
Yeah.
The rules around it are shifting. So it's not the same game that was 10 years ago. And again, that feeds into nonprofits really needing the infrastructure, the resources, the administrative support to actually be able to draw down funding. Because I will say this, and you all probably know it, it is sometimes expensive to draw down state and federal dollars. And so we want to bring them into the community as best we can, and there's a whole machine that's required, even more so, in order to effectively draw the money down, compete for the money, and then also retain the money when you are audited 6 ways to Sunday. So I just want to kind of give, it's not any one thing right now, it's about 10 different things all happening at the same time.
Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. Let's see the gentleman here. Hey, George. Thanks,
morning.
thanks for being patient.
Yeah. My wife and I are potential donors. First question is, how do you determine if the nonprofit is producing results? Secondly, are any audits involved to determine, make sure that money is going to the appropriate endeavor? And thirdly, somewhere on the presentation, there was a reference to advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
Give me an example of that, please.
Sure thing. So one form of advocacy, starting in reverse, would be, I don't know, sometime last year, it's all a blur, I went to see my dear friends who are the elected leaders of the city of Calistoga. Because the city of Calistoga has, like many jurisdictions, a housing in lieu fee. When you develop something and you're not going to build affordable housing, well, you can pay some money into this pot. And the pot had been sitting there for a minute. It was $3.5 million. And for reasons that would bore you to tears, the foundation at that time owned a 4-unit apartment complex in Calistoga. And when we discovered about the tenants, that they'd all been there for 10 years, it was gifted to us. And they all paid $1,400 in rent for a 2-in-1 across the street from the park and around the corner from the school. We're like, maybe we shouldn't sell it to some guy from Walnut Creek who's doing a 1031 exchange. Maybe we should try to sell it to Burbank Housing. And we did, but we didn't want to take a total bath on it. So I asked the elected leaders of the city of Calistoga, would you consider giving a 10-year, $400,000 loan, not a grant, to Burbank Housing so that they could acquire this property from the foundation and maintain affordability for those units? And they were delighted to say yes. At least they sounded delighted to say yes. So advocacy, in terms of the Community Foundation, only occurs within the 4 corners of Napa County. We don't have any influence outside of Napa County, but it often has the flavor of talking to a local jurisdiction like a city or a town or even the County Board of Supervisors about something that we see that could benefit the nonprofit sector. Regarding your first question about accountability, I'm going to ask Julia to talk about our grant reports as one example.
Yeah, so what we do when we're making a grant, and many of you in this room have experienced this, is we look at financial statements, we look at governance practices, we look at the programs. Often we go see them in person. And then when we make an investment, we monitor those programs. Sometimes we have conversations throughout the year, and then we require grant reports. We don't audit, but we do require information about what were the outcomes, what was the impact, what were the expenditures, and if funds are not spent as they are intended to, they come back to the foundation and go out to a different nonprofit.
Yeah.
Results.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you determine that the nonprofit is producing the results promised?
I mean, there's a term, trust-based philanthropy. We look at a lot of things. We kick the tires pretty hard. A lot of you folks have been on the receiving end of that, but we trust the nonprofits when they say, here's what we've achieved. And when they submit a grant report and say, here are the results, anything seems questionable to us, we will dig in and ask questions. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we are trusting them to report honestly on what was achieved.
Over here.
I think that's it.
Hi, everyone. This conversation is really exciting to me because this is something I'm very passionate about, which is like the trust-based philanthropy. And so I'm curious to know, given what you shared is saying, we're probably going to have to rely more on like individual giving and major donors. I guess what does that look like from the foundation or from the community in terms of supporting nonprofits by educating interested donors in trust-based philanthropy? Because yes, I definitely think there's capacity building opportunities for nonprofits to, strengthen their program evaluation and be able to, have the logic model to tell the outcomes and things like that. But that also requires a lot of staff capacity, and so I don't necessarily want to see increased burden on nonprofits that have to prove themselves or prove their worth. So I feel like, I know you talked about investing more in capacity building. Does that look like also partnerships with donor education, and so that donors can feel more equipped and confident to support nonprofits, but maybe not just based on their own ideas, I guess I'll say it that way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's see. What do I want to say about that? Bless you. Dr. Joe, are you okay? That was a big one.
Elder Barry.
I mean, one thing, like, here's a real concrete short-term thing. The first audience to see this presentation was 2 batches of our very best donors in our little conference room Tuesday morning in groups of 15 or so, because it is a sort of opportunity to let people know that things really are as bad as they feel, and to encourage where possible people to make multi-year commitments, even if they're modest, just to give our partners some runway, just to know what may be coming as an example. And we'll do some other donor education on the back of this document. And we're always trying to strike that balance because people want to know that they're being helpful, that there's something happening at the end of it all, and we're in between, right? So we collect information, we share it back to encourage and inspire people to continue to give. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, I think we're just about at time, but one of the things that we plan to do is stick around in this room. We've got this room for a while longer and answer more questions if people have them.
So this is an opportunity for anybody who's got a busy day to, with my gratitude, just discreetly slip away. So thank you for coming. We will stick around. There's more Scooby snacks. You know, how do you respond to crisis? Carbohydrates. That's how I respond. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your attention. And we'll be here for a bit if you have other questions. Appreciate it.